President Vladimir Putin announced the special military operation on the 24th of February, which initiated the Russian invasion of Ukraine, partially under the notion it was to protect the pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass and Luhansk regions from Ukrainian far-right nationalists. Though there has been much debate over the motives and ideology of Ukrainian units, such as the Azov Battalion, who since the invasion are now portrayed as Nazis in Russia, while this emotive debate has been dropped entirely in the West, they are not the focus of this video, though I may make one in the future. What we are going to look at is a unit that mirrors Azov, but have oddly been ignored in the West. Like Azov, they were a militia unit, formed in the Donbass War of 2014, proved to be determined and effective combatants, while also possessing a strong nationalist doctrine with controversial connotations, but has fought for the pro-Russian Separatists. Though there are 9 ideologically motivated units fighting for the DPR and LPR, this one is different. This is Sparta. Welcome to the Watchman's broadcast, and today we will be discussing the origins, combat history and ideology of the pro-Russian Donetsk People's Republic's Sparta Battalion. Following the Euromaidan protests, which saw the deposing of Ukraine's pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014, while many saw this as a positive step in Ukrainian history and politics with hope for integration with the EU, there were those in eastern Ukraine who saw this as a travesty. People with historic ties to Russia and of Russian heritage saw this as slamming the door closed on Russian identity in Ukraine and the end to the notion of Russia being the mother country. This sentiment saw a local counter-revolution of sorts, or anti-Maidan protests in eastern Ukraine, especially in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. Amongst one of these protests in the city of Kharkiv was a certain Arsen Pavlov, a Russian national who had served in the Russian Naval Infantry or Marines and resided in Rostov, Russia's coastal city just east of Ukraine. He also had a criminal record for disorderly conduct while drinking and stealing cars. He was a vocal protester who argued the Russian-speaking people of Ukraine should once again become part of the motherland and rejoin Russia proper. Following the Russian annexation of Crimea and the growing militia forces in Donetsk and Luhansk, Kiev feared these regions would indeed cede more of Ukraine's sovereignty. By April, the confrontation turned into open hostilities, and so began the Donbass War. Pavlov swiftly joined these militias, alongside a couple of dozen other like-minded individuals, and took up arms against the Ukrainian military. His platoon-sized force was likely made up of men who also had a military background, as they proved to be very effective as machine gun and anti-tank teams for the Separatists. During the Battle for Ilovaisk in August 2014, which was the first battle that saw the direct involvement of Russian forces in Ukraine and proved to be the first decisive separatist victory, Pavlov's skills were noted by the Kremlin. Subsequently, the Russians began supplying Pavlov with modern equipment, and he formed the Sparta Battalion, named after the Spartans of ancient Greece. Its ranks grew rapidly, and though some recruits were ex-Ukrainian servicemen and Interior Ministry personnel who had defected to the Separatists, most members were ideologically motivated volunteers from the Russian Federation and a few ethnic Russian Moldovans. The unit fostered a Russian ultranationalist outlook more than a separatist one, believing in irredentism, that all ethnic Russians should come under the rule of a Tsar-style Russian state. Indeed, their unit's badge is the colours of the old Russian Empire. After Ilovaisk, the Sparta Battalion fought in the gruelling Second Battle of Donetsk Airport in the winter of 2014 and 2015. Here, it would prove itself once again as the unit that broke through to take the terminal, a decisive move in achieving victory for the Separatists. They also fought in the subsequent Battle of Debaltseve in February 2015, alongside Russian battalion tactical groups, and were well regarded for their determination and ruthlessness, receiving priority amongst the separatist forces for modern Russian weaponry, Debaltseve once again proving a victory. With the implementation of the Minsk II agreement in the later half of 2015, which would end the period of territorial exchange in the Donbass War, the Sparta Battalion had 1,000 effectives in its ranks. The battalion also gained notoriety amongst the Ukrainians, as the battalion frequently used Ukrainian POWs in penal roles, such as burying the dead and for hard manual labour. Beatings of prisoners who did not comply or failed to work as expected are alleged to have taken place, according to Amnesty International. Torture and murder were also practiced. Arsen Pavlov was stated by Ukrainian prisoners under his care to have personally executed 15 people. Whether his men conducted themselves in this manner as well is not clear. They would remain at the fore of the Separatist front line until September 2016, when it was clear the Donbass War had evolved into a static trench war. With funding from the Russians, however, and time to train, the Sparta Battalion honed its skills, comprised of 2 companies, a specialist company and an ad hoc artillery company. As well as Russian volunteers, it also began recruiting from the DPR's male population, who became the more common source of new recruits, all of whom also claimed to have been volunteers for the unit. Whether these men adopted or diluted the unit's ultra-nationalist doctrine is unclear. Ideology was something that would catch up with the battalion's commander, Pavlov. When the Sparta Battalion was pulled from the front line, he allegedly became aggressively outspoken against the separatist republics being left in limbo by Moscow. It was clear the DPR and LPR were not going to be integrated with the Russian Federation, as he had believed, but were being used as a buffer state between the Russian border and Ukraine. Pavlov survived a car bomb in June 2016, but was killed on the 16th of October 2016 by an explosion in his office, allegedly by a sabotage team of the then fledgling Ukrainian SSO, but possibly also by the Russian FSB. As he was so disillusioned, it is likely he indicated he would begin operating independent of the Kremlin. Given his hardline views, he was hard to control, but either culprit is possible for his assassination, given his alleged treatment of Ukrainian prisoners. Despite the loss of its leader, the Sparta Battalion remains one of the most experienced and battle-hardened units of the pro-Russian separatist forces. The Russians recognised this, and while Sparta was the first back to the front with the increasing shelling in the week before the beginning of the special military operation, they were quickly reassigned to be shock troops for the invasion. As part of the Russian eastern thrust from the DPR to establish a land bridge with Crimea along the Azov coast, Sparta operated as infantry support for the tanks of the 19th Motorized Rifle Division when the invasion day arrived. Though the 19th Division was a large conventional Russian unit, it lacked combat experience and motivation, something found in abundance in the Sparta Battalion. Their objective was the small city of Volnovakha, which if taken would cut off Mariupol from the north. The Russians entered Volnovakha on February the 26th after a day of heavy bombardment. They encountered heavy resistance and were engaged in intense combat against Ukrainian mechanized units, determined territorial defense forces, and some elements of the Donbass and Azov units. The fighting lasted 2 weeks. On the 5th of March, Sparta's commander, Vladimir Zhoga, was killed. A state funeral was held for him in Donetsk city. A week later, Volnovakha finally fell to the Russian forces on the 12th of March 2022, after a rearguard defence by the Ukrainian naval infantry was overrun. Sparta's victory was short-lived, as they were immediately sent to fight in Mariupol, where their opposite number, the Azov Battalion, were putting up a fanatical defence of the city, and conventional Russian troops had floundered in their efforts to take it. Just a week after Volnovakha, they were at the fore of the vicious street fighting to take the city, alongside other notable DPR units, the Somalia Battalion and the Vostok Brigade. they fought in some of the most intense combat of the 21st century, both Sparta and Azov units convinced that survival lay in the destruction of their enemy. The Sparta Battalion were embroiled in the Battle of the City until the surrender of the surviving Azovstal defenders in May. With the fall of Mariupol, Sparta returned to the Donetsk front to try and accomplish in this conflict what they had not in the Donbass War, which was for the entire Donetsk Oblast to come under Separatist control. They rejoined the battle for Avdiivka, a grinding battle where the front has remained mostly static as it did during the Donbass War, though in late August, Sparta did capture the much disputed village of Piski, which had been contested since 2014, over 8 years prior. The battalion's current strength is unknown, namely as it claimed to have as many as 7,200 men at one point, which is certainly not an accurate figure of how many personnel it had in active service. It did claim to be brigade strong at the start of the Russian invasion, however, which would indicate 3,000 men, though by the end of 2022, as many as half its troops have been killed and it has received conscripts from Donetsk and even Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine as replacements, thus its effectiveness for future operations is questionable. If a reasonable number of its veterans remain, however, the Sparta Battalion can be counted on to be in the thick of the fighting in order to achieve its goals of a separate Donetsk People's Republic, thus a step closer to its objective of a new Tsarist Russian world. Thank you all for watching this episode of The Watchman's Broadcast. Please let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments section, and hopefully I'll see you all again very soon. Have a pleasant day.